Everyone, my name is Christian. Welcome back to another book review. Today we are going to be discussing The Floating Admiral by the Detection Club. This is a classic Golden Age mystery from, I believe, 1931. Let me check. Yeah, 1931. And there was a reprint in 2011. This is the first in a series. The other books are Ask a Policeman, Six Against the Yard, The Anatomy of Murder, The Detection Collection, I like that, and The Sinking Admiral, which is a kind of pseudo follow-up to this book, although it's written by different people. That's the 2011 book, I believe. So the premise of The Floating Admiral is that each chapter is written by a different author, and each author, well, except for the first couple of chapters, gave their proposed solution at the end of the novel, what they thought would happen if they had continued, writing it, which we'll get into more in a minute. But the authors include, and I'm going to go in order. The foreword was written by Simon Brett, who was the Detection Club president from 2001 to 2015. And I should mention the Detection Club it was originally a organization that was created by Dorothy L. Sayers, Anthony Barclay, and Agatha Christie, and it was basically a club for mystery writers to get together and have dinners and to discuss their writing and things of that nature. It also involved some secret initiation and stuff. Like, you couldn't apply to it; you had to be invited in by the people, and it's very interesting if you want to look into that. But that's kind of what it is. And nowadays, it's similar, except I don't, there's not all the crazy initiation stuff. But that's who wrote the foreword. And then we have the introduction by Dorothy L. Sayers, which I'll read out real quick, unless it's really long. Oh dear, it's a couple of pages. Sure, I guess I'll read it out to you. So here's what Dorothy L. Sayers wrote in the introduction. So this is like kind of the original foreword. So here's what she had to say. When members of the official police force are invited to express an opinion about the greatest detectives of fiction, I usually say with a kindly smile, well, of course, it's not the same for them as it is for us. The author knows beforehand who did the job, and the great detective has only to pick up the clues that are laid down for him. It's wonderful, they indulgently add, the clever ideas these authors hit upon, but we don't think that they would work very well in real life. There is probably much truth in these observations, and they are, in any case, difficult to confuse. If Mr. Robert Rode, for example, could be induced to commit a real crime by one of those ingeniously simple methods he so easily invents in fiction, and if Mr. Freeman Wills Croft says would undertake to pursue him, Bradshaw in hand, from Schreiner to St. Juan Le Pins, then indeed we might put the matter direct to the test. But writers of detective fiction are, as a rule, not bloodthirsty people. They avoid physical violence for two reasons. First, because their murderous feelings are so efficiently blown off in print as to have little energy left for boiling up in action. And secondly, because they are so accustomed to the idea that murders are made to be detected that they feel some reluctance to put their criminal theories in practice. While, as for doing real detecting, the fact is that few of them have the time for it, being engaged in earning their bread and butter like reasonable citizens, unblessed with the ample leisure of a whimsy or a Father Brown. But the next best thing to a genuine contest is a good game, and the Floating Admiral is a detection game as played out on paper by certain members of the Detection Club among themselves. And here is it is to be asked, what is the Detection Club? Okay, so here you go. It is a private association of writers of detective fiction in Great Britain, existing chiefly for the purpose of eating dinners together at suitable intervals and talking luminous shop. It owes no allegiance to any publisher, nor though willing to turn an honest penny by offering the present venture to the public. It is primarily concerned with making money. It is not a committee of judges for recommending its own or other people's books, and indeed has no object but to amuse itself. Its membership is confined to those who have written genuine detective stories, not adventure tales or thrillers. An election is secured by a vote of the club on recommendation by two or more members, and it involves the undertaking of an oath. While wild horses will not drag from me any revelation of the solemn ritual of the Detection Club, a word as to the nature of the oath is, perhaps, permissible. Put briefly, it amounts to this, that the author pledges himself to play the game with the public and with his fellow authors. His detectives must detect by their wits, not without the help of accident or coincidence. He must not invent impossible death rays and poisons to produce solutions which no living person could expect. So, in other words, no writing any solutions out of left field without proper foreshadowing. Very important. He must write good English as he can. He can preserve some kind of secrecy, inviolable secrecy concerning his fellow members' forthcoming plots and titles, and he must give any assistance in his power to members who need advice on technical points. If there is any serious aim behind the frivolous organization of the Detection Club, it is to keep the detective story up to the highest standard that its nature merits, and to free it from the bad legacy of sensationalism, claptrap, and jargon in which it was unhappily burdened in the past. Now, a word about the conditions under the Floating Admiral was written. Here, the problem is made to approach as closely as possible to a problem of real detection. Except in the case of Mr. Chesterton's picturesque prologue, which was written last. That's another thing, though. The prologue was written last, which is interesting. Each contributor tackled the mystery presented to him in the preceding chapters without having the slightest idea what the solution or solutions the previous authors had in mind. 2 rules only were imposed. Each writer must construct his installment with a definite solution in view, and that is, he must not introduce new complications merely to make it more difficult. He must be ready, if called upon, to explain his own clues cohesively and plausibly. And to make sure that he was playing fair in this respect, each writer was bound to deliver, together with a manuscript of his own chapter, his own proposed solution of the mystery. These solutions are printed at the end of the book for the benefit of of the curious reader, which some are very interesting. I mean, what's interesting also is that a lot of people came to very similar conclusions, even though none of them were told what anyone else had proposed the ending was supposed to be, or what certain suspects and clues were supposed to mean at the end, whether they were important or not. Second, each writer is bound to deal faithfully with all the difficulties left for his consideration by his predecessors. If Alma's attitude towards love and marriage appears to fluctuate strangely, or the boat was put into the boathouse wrong in first, those facts must form part of his solution. He must not dismiss them as caprice or accident, or present an explanation inconsistent with them. Naturally, as the clues become in the process of time more numerous, the suggested solutions grow more complicated and precise, while the general outlines of the plot gradually harden or fix themselves. But it is entertaining and instructive to note the surprising number of different interpretations which may be devised to account for the simplest actions. Where one writer may have laid down a clue thinking that it could point only in one obvious direction, succeeding writers have managed to make it a point in a completely opposite direction. And here, perhaps, the game approximates closest to real life. We judge one another by outward actions, but in the motive underlying those actions, our judgment may be widely at fault. Preoccupied by our own private interpretation of the matter, we can only see the one possible motive behind the action, so that our solution may be quite plausible, quite coherent, and quite wrong. And here, possibly, we detective writers have succeeded in wholesomely surprising and confounding ourselves and one another. We are only too much accustomed to the great detective airily saying, "Can you not see, you dear Watson, that these facts admit only one interpretation?" After our experience in the matter of the Floating Admiral, our great detectives may have learned to express themselves more guardedly. So basically, what it's saying is that, in a mystery novel, a lot of times the detective will be like, okay, points A to D, let me know who did it, why, how, all that stuff. But it's not necessarily true, because you could take A and say, okay, I knew A pointed me to suspect X, but someone else could be like, well, actually, A made me look at suspect Y, and they both could be technically correct, but it's compiling several different facts together to get to the ultimate ending. A might point to more than one character, but if B and C and D together with A might create a picture that might be different if A was combined with different evidence, It's very interesting, I think, especially as a mystery writer. Let's see. Whether the game thus played for our own amusement will succeed in amusing other people also is for the reader to judge. We can only assure him that the game was played honestly, according to the rules, and with all the energy and enthusiasm in which players knew how to put to it. Speaking for myself, I must say that the helpless bewilderment into which I was plunged into on receipt of Mr. Milward Kennedy's little bunch of brain teasers was apparently fully equaled by the hideous sensation of bafflement which overcame Father Ronald Knox when, having, as I profoundly imagine, cleared up much of that obscure, I handed the problem on to him. That Mr. Anthony Barclay should so cheerfully have confounded our politics and frustrated our knacky tricks in the final solution, I must attribute partly to his native ingenuity and partly to the pneumatic interference of the other three interfering solvers, who discovered so many facts and motives that we earlier groupers in the dark knew nothing about. But none of us, I think, will bear any malice against our fellow authors any more than against the vagaries of Riverline, which, powerfully guarded by Mr. Henry Wade and Mr. John Road, twin luminaries of its tidal waters, bore so peacefully between its flowy banks of the body of the Floating Admiral. So all those names are people that wrote this book. And now I'm going to go in order of the character who wrote each chapter and whatnot. So the prologue was by G.K. Chesterton, who is one of the founding members of the Detection Club. He was well known for various things, which currently escape me. I don't. But he was a big guy back in the day. But he wrote the prologue, which was actually written last, which is interesting. We get a map of the ground and stuff, which is always important in a mystery novel. Anytime there's a map or something inside of the book, it's always important. Chapter 1 is by Victor L. Whitechurch, which I believe created Father Brown. And he does not propose a solution at the end of the book because we're only one chapter in, because you got to keep in mind the prologue was not written at this point. So he didn't have a solution because, he just set up the story. And we have chapter 2, who was written by G.D.H. and M. Cole, which I believe were a married couple that wrote mystery novels together, which is pretty cool. Another thing that was really interesting about this is that across the political spectrum, all 12 of these authors were on various sides of the political aisle. And, despite their political differences, they, a lot of these people were friends and part of the same club. So, that was also interesting. Chapter 3 was written by Henry Wade, which I don't know much about. But I do plan on checking out on all these people because I am a big fan of classic Golden Age mysteries. And I write modern day versions of that, which, you can check down below if you'd like to see that. But I do plan on seeing what some of these, what these different people wrote and stuff, because I think it's interesting. And also, these are like the founding fathers kind of the golden age, which was from 1915 to 1940. That's kind of the heyday for it, between the First World War and the Second World War. Chapter 4 is by Agatha Christie, and it's been said that Christie's proposed solution to the novel is worth buying the novel itself. And I would have to agree, her solution is very Christie's solution is very, very interesting. I would say it's probably the most interesting solution in the book, and I much prefer it over the official solution of the book. But to be fair, she only wrote chapter 4, and there's 8 more chapters after that, and so certain elements of her book, of her solution, would have to change because more stuff gets added and discussed later on. But I do think it's the most original solution, so I'm not going to spoil it, but I think you should read the book and check out the endings yourself. But I would say that her ending is probably the most original, the most different from everyone else, which makes sense. She is considered the queen of crime for a reason. Also, what's interesting is that her chapter is only not even 10 pages. And it's also, I think her solution is the shortest solution. It's only 2 pages or 3 pages. It's very short. And the funny thing is that Dorothy L. Sayers wrote the longest solution, I believe. It's like 20 pages. It's longer than her actual chapter, I think. And she, I'm not the biggest Sayers fan. Like, I think she's talented, but sometimes I think she gets bogged down in the details sometimes. But I admire her dedication, and she was definitely considered one of the queens of crime for a reason. Chapter 5 is by John Rode, who I also haven't heard much about, but like I said, I plan on checking out these people and seeing what they wrote as well. Seeing, what I think of their, standalone work. Chapter 6 is by Millward Kennedy, who I've heard of, but I haven't read none of his stuff, but we got him. Then we have, let's see. Then we have Dorothy L. Sayers, who wrote chapter 7. Let's see how long that is. Okay, so yeah, her chapter is definitely longer than 20 pages, which I guess makes sense because she also wrote the longest solution. God, how many pages was it? Yeah, she wrote like about 50 pages. So yeah, her solution was half as long as her chapter. So, fair enough. Then we have Ronald Knox, who, he wrote the 10 Commandments of writing a fair play mystery. And, he was one of the big founders back in the day as well. I think I listened to someone discuss one of his novels, The Three Taps. That's also a really good mystery. I recommend. It's from the early 20s. And it's called The Three Taps is basically it's a novel. The subtitle is A Novel Without a Moral, and 3 different people, one's a police officer, one, and the other 2 are it's an insurance company investigator and his wife. These 3 different people one's trying to prove that it was murder, one was trying to prove it was an accident, the other one was trying to prove that it was suicide. Very interesting stuff. Recommend it. It's very good. I listened to that on Death of the Reader, which I recommend. They go through like old school mystery novels and break it up into parts, talking about what's happening in different sections of the book and what the theories are and stuff. Very interesting. It's on Spotify for free if you'd like to check that out. In chapter 9, we have Freeman Wills Croft, which I also heard of. I haven't read none of his stuff, but heard of him. I was thinking, some of these people have lost the time, and so I think that it's good to go back and see what some of these people were, because back in the day, they were well-known people, and it's kind of sad to see some of these people's names, getting lost to time, which, I mean, it happens, but it's kind of sad, how the passage of time can change things. Then we have Edgar Jepson, which I haven't heard of either. Wrote chapter 10. Chapter 11 is Clemence Dane, who I think that's a woman. I wouldn't swear to it, but I think it's a woman. And I'm pretty sure that, yeah, this is the chapter before the last chapter. And Clemence just writes in their solution that they had no clue what was going on. They were like, I am utterly befuddled, which is hilarious. But it all comes together. Anthony Barclay, who writes the last chapter, chapter 12, and it's funny because each chapter has a title, and his is called Cleaning Up the Mess. And it's, how long is the final chapter? Let's see. It's long because there's a lot of mess to clean up. Let's see. It is, let's see, 70 pages, which isn't terrible. But, yeah, it's a good read. I listened to it on audio for free on, I can't remember. I think I got it on Audible, but you could probably get it on YouTube because it's so old. It's from 1931, but it's a good read. And like I said, it's very interesting to hear what different people say that their solutions are. But there's also notes about the boat. So, like, I guess I should talk about the setup of the book because I actually did not talk about that. So, basically, the setup is that Admiral Pennington, right? I think that's what his name is. He is found dead in the vicar's boat with the vicar's hat in the boat. And the boat is found outside the vicarage. But the thing is that there's some rope found in the boat. He was stabbed, and the rope, I guess you used to have to tie the boat up back in the day because it's set in like it might be set in 1931 or it might be set a couple years beforehand, but it's about 1931 is one of those stories said. And the rope which they had to tie up the boat has been cut twice. And there's a whole lot of stuff going on with the tides where it's like, okay, was the boat originally here? Was it up tide? Was it down tide? Did it move? And, all that stuff. And there's several different people that are suspected in the book. Family members, friends, business acquaintances, all that stuff. And, trying to figure out why he was killed, how he was killed, how the crime took place, why was he murdered in the boat, like all this stuff. And I think it's a very good mystery. Like I said, I am not a fan of the official ending. I get why it was the ending, but I just feel like there was other proposed solutions that I found personally better. But it's easier to say when I'm not the one that had to figure out how to write the last chapter, But as a mystery writer who has grown up reading, different kinds of mystery fiction, I have my own opinions, but that's okay. But, yeah. Let's see. Also, the follow-up novel, The Seeking Admiral, which I plan on reading, is different. It's written by 14 people instead of 12. Although I heard that in that one, there's only one solution. Like, all the authors were told what the solution was. And they kind of, kept that in mind as they're writing. So, like, it's not like none of them knew what was going on. In that case, they all were in on it. They all, like, had a group meeting and were like, okay, here's what's going to happen. So, it'll be interesting to compare that to this one. But what I like about this is that the fact there is multiple endings. And it's interesting to see what different people thought different clues meant and who, what they thought every suspect was up to and whether they were involved in the murder or not. But yeah, that is The Floating Admiral. Feel free to check it out. If you do, let me know what you think. And I'll see you next time for another book review of another mystery. Probably Golden Age, but, we won't be locked in any particular time period. But I do find the older stuff to be really interesting to see how it aged, how it influenced the modern detective fiction and all that good stuff. So if you liked, subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, all that good stuff. And I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.